You know, we were playing a Guns N' Roses song while you guys were getting set up. I remember you guys had a whole thing with them, right? James, right? You hated those guys. You went on tour with them, and it was just a nightmare.
They were always late. That's why I hated them.
Was that the reason?
I think they pretty much stood for everything we didn't like. The glam, the L.A., the everything. Everything we kind of escaped.
Metallica, the unchallenged titans of heavy metal. They've ruled the stage for more than 4 decades, sold over 163 million albums globally, and established thrash for generations. But there's a catch. Not all bands have had the privilege of sharing the light with them. Behind all the grand tours and legendary shows lie tales of refusal, competitiveness, and downright mismatches. Today we're breaking down the top 10 bands Metallica refused to tour with, and why. From punk icons to glam giants, and even bitter rivals, some of these reasons will shock you. Stick around, this list is wild. Number 10. Slipknot. Few bands in the modern era embody chaos, intensity, and theatrical aggression quite like Slipknot. Since their self-titled debut in 1999, they've been one of the most explosive live acts in the world. 9 masked members tearing across the stage, pounding on drums, climbing scaffolding, and unleashing songs like Wait and Bleed in Duality. With Metallica being the biggest metal band on the planet, you'd think a joint tour between the two would be a no-brainer. But here's the twist, it's never happened. So why not? The reason lies in intensity, control, and ego. To begin with, the live performance contrast. Slipknot live shows are sheer bedlam, intentionally frenzied, chaotic, and intended to blow your mind. Pyro, jumpsuits, masks, and 9 musicians generating a maelstrom of sound and energy. Metallica's concerts, although still ferocious, are the exact opposite, tightly planned, controlled, and precise. Their concern is giving a tight, professional show. A co-headlining tour could have been a conflict of ideologies, Metallica's surgical accuracy against Slipknot's unbridled anarchy. And then there is the crowd aspect. Slipknot's crowd tends to be younger and lives on extremity. Mosh pits, wall of death, and continual carnage are the order of the day at their shows. Metallica's crowd, hungry for heavy music as it still is, cuts across age, from retro thrashers to parents bringing along their children. Blending those crowds potentially could have been explosive, with one side wanting intensity and the other anticipating legacy anthems such as Nothing Else Matters. There is also a matter of headliner pride, which cannot be disregarded. Both bands are headline material, Slipknot and Metallica. Neither would open for the other, and that raises more problematic questions. Who closes, who gets a longer set, and who actually brings in most people? Actually, for Metallica, staunch defenders of their number 1 position, risking that limelight with Slipknot was just too dangerous. It shouldn't be mentioned here there's bad blood. Indeed, Corey Taylor, the lead singer of Slipknot, has praised Metallica on numerous occasions as one of his greatest inspirations. But even Taylor has conceded in an interview in 2019 that the two bands are worlds apart in terms of how they play live. The Metallica-Slipknot tour would be left as one of the greatest what-ifs in contemporary metal. No doubt, it would have been epic, casually tossing big tempers around the venue. But one thing Metallica chose to do was tour with safer bands, Pantera or Five Finger Death Punch, as far from untouchable sludge horror that simply could not give the band what they really desired. Metallica would have gone completely crazy risks under acceptance. Therefore, the so-called dream did not get beyond the drawing board. If you think that was crazy, just wait until you see who's next. Number 9, Creed. Now, criticize them all you want, but Creed were massive in their heyday. Their album Human Clay went on to sell more than 20 million copies worldwide, with radio-dominating anthems like Higher and With Arms Wide Open. By the time their second album, Weathered, released, they were headlining festivals and arenas, solidifying themselves as one of America's largest acts. So why did Metallica never tour with Creed? It essentially comes down to musical philosophy, image, and crowd mismatch. Let's begin with the music itself. Creed gravitated heavily towards sweeping, emotive ballads, spiritual overtones, and the theatrical vocals of Scott Stapp. Their music was regularly interpreted as Christian-oriented anthems, although the band wasn't formally promoted as such. Metallica, however, established its reputation on aggression, introspection, and a bleaker outlook. It would have been tonal conflict to put them together, one band inviting people to stretch out toward the light, and the other delving into the darkness of human conflict. Then came the credibility image problem. They were playing around in the mid to late 90s with their sound, putting out Load in 96 and Reload in 97, which were fairly lukewarm receptions. They shaved their heads, changed the logo, and ventured further into alternative fare in their recordings. Metallica was in more hot water by this point for having challenged their credibility, and people were claiming that they had gone soft. Given that Creed is an overly commercial band, the butt of jokes from critics and metalheads both, Metallica did not necessarily require this ironic tour. There was a point when Lars Ulrich himself showed disdain for bands that compromised their image for radio palatability. In Metallica's book, Creed most likely represented just the sort of safe mainstream rock that they were desperately trying to escape. And then there are the fans. Creed's fan base was younger, radio-driven, and drifted toward casual rock fans. Metallica's fan base was core loyal, metalheads who breathed circle pits and headbanging. Blending the two would have been something to see. Can you picture Creed fans swaying listlessly to with arms wide open before Metallica descended upon them with battery? Not going to happen. Metallica opted instead with tour companions who could maintain their heavy chops. Corrosion of Conformity, perhaps Pantera. Creed simply wouldn't cut it, despite their chart success. There wasn't much open feud, not much public name-calling, simply a discreet, deliberate decision. Metallica would keep their reputation intact without taking the chance of what quite possibly might have turned out to be one of the least matched tours of that decade. Number 8, The Offspring. On paper, a tour that featured them along with Metallica in the mid-1990s could have been a formula for world domination. In real life, it never materialized. And why is a statement about where Metallica's mind was at for that decade? Let's turn back the clock to the mid-90s. Metallica was riding the monumental success of the Black Album. Tracks like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters had taken them well beyond the realm of thrash into outright mainstream rock superstardom. They were selling out stadiums, doing new things with their sound, and drawing in millions of new fans who had never held a Slayer or Exodus album in their hand. While that was going on, The Offspring were riding high on their debut album Smash, an album that was returning punk rock to the mainstream via hits Come Out and Play and Self-Esteem. They were not only a cult band anymore. They were spearheading a full-fledged punk revival. Both bands were huge, but in very different manners. So why didn't it occur? As Frum and Dexter Holland explained, Metallica's camp rejected an invitation to tour with them during that time. And it all boiled down, you guessed it, to musical direction. Metallica was consciously moving towards a heavier, serious image then. Their image was forged based on massive riffs, dark lyrics, and an image of being uncompromising. The Offspring, conversely, had a tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic edge to their music. Numbers like Pretty Fly for a White Guy later on only added fuel to that playful reputation. Evidently, drummer Lars Ulrich viewed the Offspring's skate punk energy as somehow incompatible with the Metallica vibe. Could you imagine Metallica devotees arriving for an evening of crushing heaviness to discover Dexter Holland cracking jokes between high-energy punk anthems? It would have been oil and water. There were also logistical considerations. By the mid-90s, Metallica was packing the football stadiums. The Offspring, as successful as they were still predominantly headlining theater and arena dates. The whole logistics of leaning them into an opening slot might have felt off. And then, let's be real, Metallica headbangers in the pit back then most likely would have devoured the Offspring. It wasn't a personal issue, however. Dexter Holland later stated that he understood the decision. No bad blood, no theatrics, just worlds apart. But fans are left to wonder what they would have witnessed on a Metallica Offspring crossover tour. A generation-spanning nexus between thrash and punk? A half-appreciative crowd and half-mobbing crowd? Either way, what an intriguing what-if from the best of 90s rock. Number 7. Limp Bizkit. Love them or loathe them, you can't help but acknowledge they were gigantic at their height. As Fred Durst swaggered about in his Red Yankees cap and tracksuits, the group spearheaded the nu metal explosion together with Korn, Linkin Park, and Slipknot. Break Stuff, Rollin', and Nookie weren't only hits. They became anthems for an entire generation of frustrated teens. So here's the billion-dollar question. Why didn't Metallica, one of the largest live attractions in the world, ever tour with Limp Bizkit during that nu metal explosion? Both bands, after all, were ruling MTV, the radio, and festival schedules. On paper, the crossover had to have been enormous. The reason lies in 3 basic things: image, fans, and dependability. Number 1, image. Metallica's brand has always been founded on grit, musicianship, and authenticity. Even when they ventured into mainstream sound on Load and Reload, there was still something serious about them. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, embraced theatrics, attitude, and a frat boy image that cried spectacle rather than substance. In an interview in 2003, James Hetfield criticized some of the nu metal bands, stating that they were more about shock value and not about being an artist. Although he did not specifically mention Limp Bizkit, it was easy enough to make the leap. And then there is the fan base problem. Metallica's fan base is staunch and rebellious, sticking with their heavy metal sound and eschewing the rap rock crossover wails of Limp Bizkit fans. More significant, during the Saint Anger era, Metallica were receiving so much flack from the public. They'd be taking a gamble and not turning off hardcore fans with a spot on the same ticket as Limp Bizkit. I can only imagine how the people who enjoy hardcore thrashing would feel standing in the pit, just having to listen to Rollin'. No way. And finally, it was that reliability thing. Limp Bizkit, after all, became a byword for mayhem in the wake of Woodstock 99. Their image is one of half riots and brawls, and as such, promoters and bands both began to wriggle to be associated with them. Metallica, off the impressive but most grandiose S&M symphony endeavor, wouldn't risk their credibility on sullying their reputation over a co-headlining gig with a media-spouting, irresponsible act. A Limp Bizkit Metallica bill could have been won, but it never materialized. To be honest, good likely. Metallica is attempting now to actually put themselves back in pieces, while Fred Durst and crew simply slant further toward nu metal infamy. Different worlds, different roads, and Metallica is not obviously interested in the carryover. Number 6, Nickelback. Okay, let's be real. Nickelback were totally huge during the early 2000s. Their album Silver Side Up came out in 2001, and soon enough How You Remind Me was everywhere. Radio, MTV, bar jukeboxes, you couldn't get away from it. Nickelback were among the decade's most commercially successful rock acts. So, if they were as massive, why didn't Metallica ever take them out on tour? The reason is all about image, credibility, and fan expectations. First and foremost, Metallica has always considered itself to be the people's band. Even in their most experimental moments, they've positioned themselves as real, as uncompromising as possible, and tied to the raw energy of metal. Nickelback, however, built a reputation, rightfully or wrongly, as corporate rock. They sounded glossy, radio-friendly, and aimed for mass consumption. To dedicated metal enthusiasts, Nickelback embodied everything Metallica had struggled against in their early stages. Collaborating with them would have sent the whole wrong message. For starters, timing was critical. Early in the 2000s, Metallica were already being criticized for the Saint Anger album. A lot of the fans are arguing over its raw and unpolished production, the lack of guitar solos, and its aggressive tone. The critics are not friendly either. Metallica did not want to give more fodder to their detractors. Therefore, collaborating with a band like Nickelback would most likely be seen as the ultimate sellout. Picture the headlines. Metallica softens up with Nickelback. Sure isn't a good one. There's also contrast in the live performance. Metallica comes in heavy with its tours, circle pits, headbanging, and raw catharsis. Nickelback, however, had a huge draw for its tours, circle sing-alongs, and pop-friendly rock anthems. It's not as if Nickelback wouldn't have an awesome show. They just would absolutely. Just a completely different atmosphere. Mixing those crowds would be uncomfortable at best and cataclysmic at worst. On it, it's also culture. Nickelback has been on the joke slate since band whom everyone jests at while privately aware of all of his lyrics. Metallica didn't need this language around any of their brand. They were rebuilding legacy and credibility, not tossing it to the winds for punchlines. So, while the Metallica-Nickelback combination should have pulled crowds and thousands back in the early 2000s, it then just did not appeal to Metallica's identity. Such a group would only be sacrificing its legacy, keeping its fan loyal, and avoiding ridicule that could have ensued. Sometimes, the smartest move is the one you do not make. Gasp in amazement because the next tale is taken to the next level. Number 5. Korn. When Korn exploded onto the music scene back in the mid-1990s with their self-titled debut album and subsequent albums, such as Follow the Leader and Issues, they essentially created an entire new breed of heavy music. Their down-tuned guitars, stomach-churning lyrics, and Jonathan Davis's gritty vocal delivery cut a darker, angst-filled niche of rock that resonated with millions of people. In the late 90s, Korn were no longer a band. They were a movement. So why did Metallica, who were also heavy music titans, never tour with them? After all, both bands were festival headliners. Both ran MTV